how do you keep the value? Like, because this is very different, I think, from my Bank of Amsterdam example. Because there, sort of, you have the gold in the vault, and then the Bank of Amsterdam money, creates liquidity for people who have gold. They can spend that money. But you do something similar with Ether. However, your tokens are pegged to US dollars. And this was different in this Bank of Amsterdam. It's just like pegged to gold. You're not pegged to Ether. Like, why is that, and how does that work?
Yeah, so the equity holders, the value of the equity, we'll call it the LQTY token because that's what it is. So it's like, it's not really, the value of that is not guaranteed. That can go up and down. Mm-hmm. And people can, the market values that based on like expected revenues in the system. So last year we did like $28 million in revenue, and then people can kind of extrapolate that back to the value of one LQTY token because there's a finite supply of those. But the other side of things is this LUSD token, and that is pegged to the dollar. And we want that to maintain a very good price stability. And yeah, I mean, it's like the Ether is the collateral, which is a volatile asset, but you borrow dollars against that. But we do ensure that the whole system is always over collateralized, so that the value of the total collateral in the system is greater than the value of the outstanding LUSD debt. And that's enforced kind of at the individual level, where each borrower has to maintain a minimum collateral ratio of 110%. So if they deposit like $11,000 worth of ETH, they can't borrow more than 10,000 LUSD. And if they fall below that level, they're actually vulnerable to liquidation. And it's those liquidations that keep the system healthy and keep it over collateralized and keep the LUSD fully backed.
Yeah, because that's how I interpret that your stablecoin differs from a lot of others, right? Like how I see it, yours, and maybe this will piss off some sort of crypto, people who have a crypto ideology of getting off the fiat based system. You build on the fiat system because that's what you ultimately peg to, I would say. But then there are a lot of stablecoins that build on the fiat system directly because they sort of have like 100% reserve bank situation going on where they have a lot of fiat assets like US treasuries, and then they issue stable coins against that. But you have sort of Ethereum in between. And how I understand, like, because Ethereum fluctuates, you need people to put in more Ethereum, and hence that's over collateralized to make sure, that the peg isn't broken. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's because we have this volatile asset Ether that can drop, 10 or 20% in a day. We need it to be sufficiently over collateralized to actually fully back the LUSD supply. Yeah.
Yeah, but what happens because I think you're over collateralized 110%. Is that right?
That's the minimum on an individual level. Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay. And people can choose how much they want to be over collateralized.
Yeah, right. And we have kind of the riskier borrowers and the safer borrowers. And we have many people at like 200 or 300% collateral ratio. So they have like collateral to their debt. And then we have, the riskier ones who like to ride the boundary and stay closer to that 110%. Yeah.
Because then you sort of monetize more of your Ether and you're still invested in Ether and you can spend it on other stuff as well.
Yeah.
Right. But then, how do I lose if I do that? Like if I borrow from you, through your system, through your protocol, I borrow from someone else through your protocol and I over collateralize at 110% because I love risk. But the price of Ether now drops by more than 10%, which actually happened, I think, right? Not too long ago, or probably for some borrowers. How does that then work?
So I'll talk about just kind of a small price drop first, and then maybe we can talk about the kind of more extreme scenarios. Mm-hmm. So like in Liquity, when somebody falls below that 110%, they're immediately vulnerable to liquidation. And liquidations are very quick in Liquity. So they happen within seconds or minutes of a trove falling below that level, because the actual process is kind of automatic within the system and pretty much instant. And so the only kind of time delay is based upon like waiting for somebody to actually trigger the liquidation. And it's a publicly accessible function. So anybody can kind of press the liquidation button and liquidate a position in Liquity. And in doing so, they actually get compensated for that because there are transaction costs on Ethereum. Anytime you take any action, it costs a bit of Ether. So our system actually pays out some LUSD and some Ether to more than cover the cost of liquidation. So it's kind of like well incentivized, and these liquidations do happen pretty much instantly when somebody is vulnerable to it. So most liquidations we see happening, even if the price of Ether is dropping heavily or quite fast, we see liquidations happen at like 109% or 108%, just as the position's just fallen below the minimum collateral ratio.
Mm-hmm. That happens automatically then. It's sort of.
Yeah, you can think of it as automatic. It's kind of outsourced to anybody who wants to actually trigger that function.
Yeah.
But it's
to the so to the lender basically, or the borrower. Who triggers that function? I didn't quite catch it.
It can actually be anybody, like anybody with can sit at their laptop and just call that function. They can go on a website that accesses Liquity, see a vulnerable trove, liquidate it, and make a profit. So it's kind of a race between anyone.
Okay, interesting. So if you and I are through your protocol in a loan agreement, someone who's watching live now can actually liquidate that agreement between the two of us.
So there wouldn't be an agreement between two parties in Liquity. It's really just you borrow against your own collateral, and the borrowed funds are just minted by the system when you borrow. Yeah. So, but in terms of liquidation, that's right. Like anyone, a third party, not Liquity, not you, the borrower, just someone else on the internet can liquidate you. And actually, originally, like when we launched, we saw that happening, these kind of manual liquidations where people actually pressing that button on the front end website. But now it's kind of become much more automated, and people run bots and do it more professionally. And it's kind of like, it's, within seconds, liquidations happen from these professional liquidators.
And they get a share of what exactly if they do that? Like, how do they get rewarded for that?
So when somebody takes out a loan, 200 LUSD is reserved as a kind of compensation in case of liquidation. Mm-hmm. So that's paid out to the liquidator. But also we actually take a small cut of the collateral that is in the loan. We call the loans troves actually. So in the trove there's the Ether collateral, and we take a small cut, which is 0.5%, and that's sent to the liquidator. So that kind of compensates liquidators, even in extreme times of very high network congestion, when the transaction costs are very high. It can always be profitable to liquidate a trove if it's big enough.